Okay, this last video is the way you are going to finish your stuffy that you're making. So on the edge of your stuffy, we're going to actually sew around the edges and put the two pieces together, and we're going to see that sewing that's on the edge. So we want it to look nice. So you've got two choices of what type you want to use, right? And so we're going to practice a whip stitch and a blanket stitch on the same one. So what we want to do is have it near an edge, and the way the photocopy turned out, it wasn't quite near an edge. So what I want you to do is to get your scissors, right? And we're going to make this near an edge. So when we're sewing up something near an edge, you want to have about a ½ an inch, could be a quarter of an inch, but about a ½ an inch, like a pinky's width of a nail right here. So that's what we mean by edge. So if I was sewing up the side of my stuffy to keep it together before I put the stuffing in, this is how I want you to finish the edge. Okay, so when you're making a blanket stitch or a whip stitch, it takes a little bit more thread than it does to normally stitch it because one of them just is longer. It has one extra step. So what you'll want to do is probably, to make it easier on yourself, don't plan on stitching the entire edge of your stuffy or whatever item at once. So if the piece of string is really, really long, it makes it hard to deal with, right? So what I say for kids is to not have like more than an arm's length at a time. So when I say arm's length, we mean like a wingspan, right? So you hold it in one hand and you stretch it as far as your arms will go, and that's about a wingspan. That's how wide it is when you open your arms. So I want you to just use about that much string, okay? So we're gonna practice the edge, and I know I keep switching colors, but it's just because I have a bunch of random, I have the ends of all of the packages. So when you practice, you can practice all with the same color, whatever I gave you the most of, because you don't want to run out. On your stuffy, you probably want it to be colorful stitching. Okay, so I'm going to thread my needle here. Threading my needle. Let's see. Tori, would you turn on the light? Oh. Oh. Go. So here is our whip stitch. So I've threaded my needle, and now I need to put my knot in. And there we go. Slip knot 1, slip knot 2, right on top of each other. Okay, so we'll get more instruction when we're ready to sew up the edge of our stuffy, because I will want you to know where you're starting and stopping and where you're going to stuff it. And so we'll talk more about that later, but just so you know, this is like for an edge, right? So imagine this is the edge of your fabric. So as usual, starting from under, okay? So first we're gonna start with the whip stitch, okay? So the whip stitch is kind of just a stitch that wraps around. So think about doing a backwards pedaling motion, right? So like a bicycle, you're winding backwards. So it's going to make kind of a diagonal line. Now if I was sewing up my stuffy, I would want to make sure that my stuffing is not going to come out. So I know that there's lots of space between these dots that I've drawn, but on your stuffy, we're going to have a little bit more space, because you don't want your stuffing to pop out of your stuffy. Stuffy that loses its stuffing would be very stuffy. Okay, so at the edge, it makes this kind of diagonal line. Oops, and I got caught up in something. Here we go. And as usual, so the more string you have, the more tangles you weave. Okay, so basically the whip stitch and the blanket stitch, you're going to start the blanket stitch, but there's one extra step, and this is what they call a whip stitch. Okay, so I'm just going to start as usual, go up through, okay, and then I go back and I grab the last string I was through, and then oops, and I go back over, and this is where it's a little tricky to see, right? So you don't want to pull too tight, but I'm going to grab it again. So each time I'm going back and grabbing that string that I got, and on the edge you're going to get this cool stitch that looks like little rectangular pieces. Okay, so once again, always start from under, pop it up. Now I'm almost through, so I'm going to slow down, and I can see I'm almost through. I'm going to grab that string that I was pulling on, same string, okay, and then I don't want to pull too hard. I'm just going to kind of tighten it so that the knot gets tighter, and then I have this nice edge with a yellow line, and then I have these little, kind of look like little teeth marks underneath. So the whip stitch and the blanket stitch are kind of start out the same way, right? So I just grabbed it, pull it through, and then each time I notice how I'm pulling it, and then I want to bring the knot down so I don't make it too loose. Okay, and if I pull it too tight, I'll get cinching, and then I'll have it, won't look so nice. So that's why I want to leave this just a hair loose, so I can pull it up, and then pull it towards the edge. So kind of I'm pulling the pressure this way, and that keeps it lined up. Okay, and then the last one. Okay. Oh, and I got caught in more string. Here we go. So there we are. We're almost finished with the edge. Okay, so because this does take a little bit more string, and if you were trying to use this for the edge and you run out, right? So the key is that you always leave yourself enough string to be able to tie it off. So if I used up all my string and I sewed until it was only a tiny, tiny bit, I have no way to tie it off because that is too short, right? So it's always better to, if you get down to like 6 inches or so, if I was sewing and I had hardly any left, I would snip it here, and then I would tie it off in the back, right? So it would be disappeared back here, and then I would rethread with more of the same color and start exactly where I left off, okay? So if you run out of thread, you try to make it look like you didn't run out of thread, right? And tie it back off to the back and start a new, and then you'll start a new thread and start over again, right? So I can pull these and make them tight and then tie it to the back. Sometimes I like to actually put the needle through the thread. It helps the knot stay put to the right place when I have my loop. There we go. Okay. Alrighty, well, that was the end of your card, okay? And there's your example of a blanket stitch and a whip stitch. So you've got zigzag lines or kind of a squared off line.